entertainment and whatnot. How do you guys suggest, people who care about or passionate about what the erosion of civil liberties would combat groupthink and party affiliation?
Good question. How you combat party affiliation?
Yeah, but they don't hold politicians responsible, like Glenn was talking about.
Partisanship.
The partisanship. How Obama had the same foreign policy as Bush. How would you suggest to people who are so loyal to their party they can't hold their own politicians accountable? How would you combat or suggest combating? Because I try to engage people all the time and try to say, hey, listen up. You can't be loyal to this person because they're doing these things. Like, how would you guys suggest?
Well, the lexicon is what, Grover Cleveland addressed this in his first inaugural. It's the citizens have an obligation, just like the members, to have one allegiance to the Constitution of the United States. Are you an American or not? We have one loyalty. We hang together, we hang separately. You should be ashamed. Politics isn't a football game. We all try to make it go ahead. And it's that peer pressure. You want to make people ashamed, just like they use the N-word. Now the people are ashamed about using it. You'd be ashamed about saying, well, the Democrats, they want to know. All Americans want to. And once the peer pressure is there, the problems will be easy to solve.
The other thing I would add to that is, I actually do think that this two-party structure and the way it breeds this tribal loyalty is one of the things that impedes progress more than anything else. And in part it's because there's cultural tribalism. There's people identify so greatly with the two parties even when there are a few differences, because one of the parties might be led by somebody who's an evangelical Christian who is from the region of the United States that some people identify with, and then the other party might be led by someone who's an urbane East Coast elite that the other half of the country identifies with. These are powerful cultural draws that make people go at each other's throats over basically symbols, while they're basically supporting and enabling the same policies. But what I think is encouraging about that is you see a lot of movements that are really existing outside of that structure for the first time in a long time, especially among younger citizens who have become disillusioned with the two-party system. You saw that with the Tea Party, which was not, at least at first, meant to be an organ of the Republican Party, although it sort of became that. It was meant to be a challenge to it. You see that with Occupy Wall Street, which is definitely not, an organ of the Democratic Party or the Obama campaign. It's intended to operate outside of those political institutions. You saw it, you see it with the Ron Paul campaign, which although it sort of exists within the Republican structure, it's really kind of parasitic on the Republican Party. It's using it to sort of destroy it from within, which is what I like most about it. What's so interesting about the Paul campaign is, a lot of the adherents to Ron Paul's candidacy are not traditional Republicans. They're not going to end up, endorsing Mitt Romney or Rick Santorum if they're the nominees, the way Ron Paul's not going to endorse them. And it's really kind of scrambled the ideological categories and this partisan stasis in such an interesting way. The reason why progressives were so petrified of the Paul candidacy and tried so hard to smear him and sort of depict him as this white supremacist and racist and all that was because they were so petrified that all of that progressive young enthusiasm that fueled the Obama campaign was instead going to go to the Ron Paul faction in whatever form it took, so that even if he wasn't the Republican nominee, people would be focused on whatever it became rather than the Obama presidency. And this is the kind of scrambling of these traditional rigid categories that is an urgent priority for any change to occur. And I think you're seeing it in a lot of different ways. I think younger Americans are much less inclined to form their political identity based on blind, mindless loyalty to one of the two political parties. And that's what needs to be encouraged more than anything else, is the idea that we need to think independently and critically.
Yeah, I sent my mom your articles, and I get a video of Obama singing out Greenback, so they don't listen.
Let's take hypnotic effect.
The final is this. Okay, I said over here, but let's take this question, that, and that'll be it.
Thanks. My name's Ralph Weber, and nobody's talked about Obamacare and how it's getting into our liberties. I'd be interested in hearing three opinions on what the Supreme Court's going to say in June.
I think the vote will be 5-4 to strike the bill is beyond the powers of Congress.
The whole bill or just the
But it-
mandate?
Well, I think the court will conclude that they have a doctrine in law called severability that only lawyers worry about. But basically, the court will consider would the Congress have voted for the legislation without the particular mandate that is struck. And I think most people believe that even though it could operate without it, that the Congress would not have passed the bill. They'd have to go back and reenact it without the individual mandate. But I think that it'll be a 5-4 vote.
Okay, the final question as we're collecting these cards right here.
Hi, I'm Ellen. I'm actually the president of College Republicans at Swanee, but I've still really appreciated everything I've heard here this evening. I'm interested in a few things. One, you talked about how we haven't had a terrorist attack in over a decade, and I'm wondering why do you think the last terrorist attack, the anthrax sent to the Pentagon in October of 2001, that still isn't fully explained? And then going along with biological warfare, I'm curious, at what point do you think defensive development becomes offensive development?
I'm so happy that you asked about the anthrax attack because, first of all, almost nobody remembers that. And even though I've written about it 1,000 times, I almost never get asked about it. What's amazing about the anthrax attack is I actually think that it was at least as significant of an event in shaping what has happened over the last 10 years in terms of civil liberties and the fear level as 9/11. 9/11 was this sort of one-time event. The anthrax attacks occurred almost immediately after. It had this very scientific, this science fictitious feel to it. It showed up in people's homes, in their mailboxes, so it really suggested that you can die by terrorism, not by being in a large skyscraper or being on the wrong plane, but just we're all now threatened. And what's amazing about the anthrax attacks, as significant as they were, in terms of elevating the fear level, is that it's so obvious that there's been no resolution to who the culprits were. The first person that the FBI accused of being the perpetrator, they ended up having to apologize to and pay $5 million to in damages for having wrongly accused them. And then the second person who is now the accused is Bruce Ivins, who never got put on trial because he committed suicide before that could ever happen. And the case against Bruce Ivins is incredibly dubious. There are huge evidentiary holes in the case against him. And the most mainstream journals, like the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, members of Congress in both political parties, science journals like Science Magazine have all said that the scientific and factual evidence against Bruce Ivins is extremely unpersuasive. And they just revealed about a month ago that there's internal documents where even Justice Department prosecutors have been arguing internally, saying that the case against him could never withstand any sort of judicial examination. And what's so amazing about it is that this is probably the most significant event of the last 10 years, if not after 9/11, certainly on par with it. And yet mainstream institutions all over the country, including the Justice Department, are saying that the case against him is very unpersuasive. What we know for sure is that it was an attack that came from a U.S. medical facility, an Army facility, a science facility within the U.S. Army. And there were elements of the U.S. government leaking to the media that there were tests that proved that Iraq was behind the anthrax attack, which elevated the fear level against Iraq. It's an incredibly significant political crime for which there's been no resolution, and there's calls everywhere for investigations, and yet there's almost no movement to have them. And that just shows how immunized our political class is from answering for anything. I mean, this is not like a conspiracy theory that you have to go to pockets of the web in order to find people skeptical of a case against Bruce Ivins. It's really every mainstream institution that looks at the evidence against him has concluded that it's it's completely unresolved case, and who knows who is actually behind the anthrax attacks or what the motives were. But the fact that we're not demanding that we find out is pretty significant. But I'm really glad you asked. No one ever does.
Well, I think the broader question is, well, what's the explanation for the absence of any second edition of 9/11? And the implication is, well, is there always extraordinary powers that have foiled these plots that otherwise would have been hatched, or not? And that's a good question, and that's why when I opposed the Patriot Act, I said to Congress, have you got a scrap of evidence over the last 10 years that any of these extraordinary powers have foiled a single terrorist plot, or was a substantial factor? And the answer was no. They had nothing. The FBI didn't come up with any. You got conclusions based upon secret facts, but you know that if these authorities had been employed successfully to thwart a plot, it would take about a nanosecond for the president to declassify the information and leak it out, just like they know how to leak out information about Valerie Plame, Joe Wilson, etc. I've been around 43 years, and the administration is very good about declassifying anything that things will help them politically. And there's still nothing. There is an Inspector General report in the CIA that examined literally tens of thousands of illegally intercepted emails and conversations that ensued pursuant to the terrorist surveillance program in violation of FISA. Couldn't find a single case where any of that information was useful in any terrorism investigation that was thwarted. Now, it's certainly true that the Constitution is not a suicide pact, but that's why it's so important, as I stated in my presentation, that the rule has got to be liberty, and the burden's on the government to show why these authorities are necessary. It's not us to say, well, there's no conceivable circumstance in the next 5,000 years that it might not happen upon a piece of information that permits some crime to be thwarted. And that's why, in my judgment, it's not very plausible to suggest that the reason why there hasn't been another 9/11 or something akin to that is because we have all these endowed powers. Just one example, military commissions that combine judge, jury, and prosecutor in the same branch, the definition of tyranny, secret evidence, all the trappings of due process, totally naked for a military commission. Are they really important to fighting international terrorism? They used 6 times in 10 years. You know, the first time was against, I believe, David Hicks. He was sort of an Australian Che Guevara who went and trained in the terrorist training camp. He never killed an American. He got 9 months in prison. The second was the driver of Osama bin Laden. You know, like we would prosecute the chef of Adolf Hitler in Nuremberg. You know? He got 6 months in prison, like a drunk driving conviction. Then a handful of cases that ended up being guilty pleas. Some of them are all back serving. There's another case that I'm working on, Belleville. It's the video recruitment case. But is anyone going to say that military commissions are the ones responsible for preventing, stopping another terrorist attack, even though they've been virtually dormant for all these years and have resulted in sentences that are more lenient than those prosecuted in civilian cases? And the last observation I would make is this. If we look at just homicide in the United States, they run about 17,000 a year for the last decades. So since 9/11, you know, we've had like 170,000 homicides. Staggering number if we thought that was attributable to terrorism, what would be in martial law. And no one's suggesting, my gosh, we have 17,000 homicides. We have laws against murder, we prosecute murders, we sentence them sometimes to death. They just don't work, because we still end up with homicides, right? The homicides don't go away. Let's just abandon the laws against murder. They don't work. We just have to have the military to break down anybody's home, and they think this person could be a murderer, we stick them in a detention camp. Suspend habeas corpus. No one says that. But that's exactly the argument that's being used with regard to terrorism. Well, listen, we had the laws against terrorism. There was, even before 9/11, there was the 1993 Trade Center bombings. We prosecuted them, but then we had terrorism again. But not anything like the lethality of homicide. But I said, well, the laws don't work because they still get violated. Which, if that were the standard, we would say no laws work, because all of them are violated at one time. And so it comes up, and finally the judgment is, are we as a people willing to take a small risk of another 9/11 in order to ensure our freedom and say, yeah, we'd rather be free than absolutely unfree, but risk-free?
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that this is a very clever argument on behalf of those people that advocate these infringements on liberty, because they say, well, look, there hasn't been another attack, and so see, this shows you that we need to continue these infringements on liberty. Suppose there have been 5 attacks since 9/11. What would their argument be? Oh, it shows you that we need to have these infringements on liberty continue. So either way, they're going to get their way, and this is why we go back to this absolute that Bruce just said, is how important is it for you to be free? And that's what I was saying in my talk, is that I don't care if you could show me that I'm 10 times safer with these measures. I'm not interested in that. What matters to me is to be free. And if that means that some terrorist has got a better shot at killing me and blowing up the building I'm working in, I'm willing to take that risk because I die a free man instead of somebody cowering that the government's taking care of and living the rest of my life, because the government's taking care of it. That's not worth it for me.
I'd like to thank everybody for being here this evening. We have some of the books here that are from the authors, the panelists who are also authors, and they will gladly autograph them for you. I have been shuffling these cards, and I'm just going to pull randomly. You can come up here and select if you are the lucky winner. Let's see. First we have Mary Myers.
Yeah, that's my wife when she had to go take care of our
Do
dog
you want
in the car.
Do you want to come take it? Okay, let's choose another winner. Take a look and take All right, excuse me if I don't pronounce this correctly. Galadriel, Diana Robinson. I totally massacred that. That's you. All right. How do you say that, by the way? Galadriel.
Lord of the Rings.
Okay, well, that's right.
Meldorian Queen.
Ralph Weber. Ian Myers.
The whole Myers family.
And that's all the books. I think Mr. Ornberger has a few closing comments before we get out of here tonight. And let me say that there is going to be an after party at the Boulevard Bar and Grill, 1202 East Main Street, where this discussion will continue.
On behalf of the Future of Freedom Foundation, I want to thank you very much. I want to thank the guys that organize this here in the local Yale chapter. I know how much work goes into doing this, and you have no idea how nice it is for the speakers to just come in and have all the work already done on the organizational, and it's been fantastic. Bruce and I were given a panel on this subject last summer, and it was Bruce's idea, it was his inspiration. He says, we ought to take this to some college campuses. And boy, the light bulb went off in my head, and then just 3 minutes later, I run into Jeff Frazee at the same conference, National President of Yale, and I said, hey, Jeff, and he had been in our panel, and I said, you think you might be interested in putting this panel on for colleges? And he grabbed it immediately. He says, I love it. And so we said, well, I want to get Glenn Greenwald, and both these guys are my heroes.